Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Today is Substance Use Disorders and MI, integrating motivational interviewing into your rehab counseling practice. So lovely to meet all of you. My name is Vanessa Perry. I use she, her, ella pronouns. So ella is a pronoun that's specific to Spanish speakers or the Latinx community. I do identify as Latina. So including that pronoun is just a shout out to all of my colleagues that are Latinx. A couple of things just about group norms. I know that everyone's probably super used to being on Zoom and other web meetings by now. So it's up to you what you decide to do with your camera. If you want to leave it on, if you want to turn it off, if you need to step away at some point and turn it off, perfectly okay. I invite you to participate at points that feel comfortable throughout the time that we have together. You participating by asking questions or sharing examples from your own work experience or offering feedback or connecting with each other with other learners is participatory learning. So please do not view that as an interruption. I gladly welcome participation from all of you at points throughout. Please don't feel like you need to stop and raise your hand. You can simply participate. And I also have a few minutes set aside at the very end for questions and discussion and feedback. So today we're going to learn a lot of content with a little bit of practice. And then tomorrow and Thursday, we're going to do a lot more practice. So today we're going to kind of get our feet under us when it comes to learning some of the larger philosophical and ideological tenets of motivational interviewing. Okay, let's keep moving forward. So I'm faculty at the University of Arizona here in Tucson. I have worked in a wide variety of settings after getting my master's degree in rehab counseling and advanced certificate in psych rehab. I worked for a self-advocacy and self-determination agency working with young adults with developmental disabilities. I also worked for the vocational rehabilitation agency in California, serving predominantly a transition age youth caseload, but also a little bit of a generalist caseload with some SMI and supported employment clients as well. And I also worked for the Marine Corps as a civilian doing a lot of social service support. And then now I find myself at the University of Arizona where I'm faculty. And we have a program that is duly accredited in clinical rehab counseling and clinical mental health. So I get to teach a lot of really fun things about rehab and about mental health. And I use a lot of motivational interviewing with students and also with some of the clients that I work with in my private practice. Okay, so today, what and why will be mostly what we learn about today. So what is motivational interviewing? Why would I want to use motivational interviewing, and how would I use motivational interviewing? So we're going to do a lot of learning and application. So we're going to do some case studies, some breakout rooms, small groups, role play, a lot of different types of activities. So it's not just me talking all the time. So this is day one. Let's start building our knowledge base together. Okay, so let's talk about communication styles. You use different communication styles based on who you're working with, if it's a colleague, if it's a loved one, if it's a client, and also based on the circumstance. And so it's important for us to conceptualize communication styles as a continuum. It's not necessarily we flip a switch to this way or that way, or we check a box, we're going to communicate this way, that way, or another way. So the way that Miller and Rolnick, who are the figureheads of motivational interviewing, the way that they conceptualize communication styles is as directing on one end of the continuum. We see that on the left. And then on the right end, following. And then in the middle is guiding. So let's break these down. And let's start with the left side, which is directing. So what does directing look like when we're using this communication style? Well, we're giving somebody information. Maybe we're telling them about when the next orientation is, or what information about who's eligible for a certain program, right? So we might be giving instruction or perhaps giving some advice. We're telling people what to do and also how to proceed. So the implication here is that I have knowledge about what you should do, and here's how you should do it. So with directing style of communication, it often requires that someone complies with the information or the advice that we're giving, right? So someone is giving and the other person is receiving. So a question to all of you: when or with whom would directing be an appropriate style to use or an inappropriate style to use?
I think this is Ruby. I think that I would use the directing style with a family member, loved one. Um, and it could be good, but it can also be not good. But that is where I see myself, or I would see myself using the directing type of communication.
Sure. So maybe if you have a little bit more of a personal relationship with someone, you have some more social equity with them. And also maybe if there's some type of like a history or understanding of how the two of you communicate. Maybe if there's a differential in power, or maybe if someone is an elder or versus a child or somewhere in the middle, right? That is going to also affect who is using the directing style of communication. Yeah, that's a great example, Ruby. Thank you. Does anyone else want to share an example?
Just to add on that, with my position here at Center for Independence as a disability benefits case manager, there are certain, I would use directing as part of the as part of my job, in that I assist people in applying for disability benefits, SSI and SSDI. And so there are certain forms that are would require more directing rather than guiding or following. There are certain things that need to be completed before we can move to the next step. So I would use a little bit of directing
Yeah,
in working with consumers.
Ruby, that's a fantastic point. So it really depends on kind of the circumstance quite often. And it's not to say that directing is always good or bad, or following is always good or bad. It really depends on what we're trying to get accomplished, right? If you're trying to help a client complete a form, if you're giving information or a referral, that's going to be directing. Because if we're trying to use a following style, that's not going to be appropriate. That's not going to work really well, right? Because the client doesn't have the information they need to complete that form. Just like other situations, like if a client is experiencing psychosis, right? Or if they are intoxicated, right? We're probably going to want to use more of a directing style to help a client navigate a situation. So it really depends. So I want to be clear in that we're not assigning a value to each of the different parts of the communication continuum, but we're kind of sifting through like, when might things be a better fit for clients or situations than others. So thanks for chiming in. Okay, let's look at the other end, the right side, the opposite end of the continuum. Following. So following is really just taking an interest in what someone has to say, trying to understand what they're conveying to you, what they're communicating maybe with their thoughts or their feelings. And we respectfully refrain from inserting our own comments, our own materials. So what's implied here is, I trust your own wisdom, and I'm here with you and I will stay present with you. And I will let you work this out on your own way. So when do you think following might be appropriate or inappropriate, like with whom or in what circumstances?
A lot of our folks who live with a disability, as Mary was saying, either an emotional, mental disability or even a physical disability, those disabilities are rooted in trauma. And so oftentimes doing an intake, we have a real need as case managers to get the information that we're writing down, on that intake. And they're having a need to be heard. And so to kind of gear down and come into active listening and hold that space. When people feel heard and seen, it just sets the stage for much more successful relationship that can be months or years long. I mean, it takes months and months to get a disability application kind of through the system. So we're really working closely for a long time with these folks, and to really know them and know their history. That's where, for me, following comes into play.
Julie, I hear two really good examples in there. The first is when you're working with clients who've experienced trauma, right? We can't just like be super direct. We can't use the directing style like, okay, I need to know X, Y, and Z, right? Because that doesn't honor the sensitivity with which we need to interact with clients with trauma, right? We need to be practicing trauma-informed care. So following is much more gentle in nature and gives us the opportunity to meet clients where they're at in their trauma recovery and their trauma experiences. And also intake. Of course, we have certain information that we need to get, that we need to know from clients and about clients. But that's also an excellent opportunity to invite clients to share the parts of their story that are most salient with them, with you, in the way that they want, right? So intake and working with clients who've experienced trauma, both of those are really excellent examples of where following and be the best fit. And so just like the opposite of directing. So if a client is experiencing a crisis, we may use aspects of following, but we're probably going to use a little bit more directing to help mold the situation and try to get the situation triaged. Okay, so in the middle of this continuum, in the middle of directing and following, we have guiding. So think of like a literal tour guide. So if you're going to go to another country, for example, maybe think back to the before times when you're able to travel abroad and you hired a guide to help you. So it's not the guide's job to order you like, oh, well, you will be here at this time, or you must do this, and well, you will go here and there, and you're going to look at this or that. But also a good tour guide doesn't just kind of follow you around as you wander through a city or a museum. A skillful guide is a good listener. They maybe learn about what are some of the things that you like, that you want to see. How quickly do you want to look at things? How often would you like to take breaks, right? So they're listening to you, but they also offer expertise where it's needed. So they might offer an array of suggestions about like, hey, a lot of tourists really enjoy looking at this fountain, or they like seeing this painting or doing this activity, right? Based on the expertise that they have to offer. So that's why it's in between directing and following, because it integrates components of the two of them, and in a way that's a really good balance. So we can see that with guiding there may be some situations where this is a good fit, but others, just like directing and following, where it might not. But it's really important to note that guiding is really the heart, the spirit of motivational interviewing. So what do you think, just throwing this out there, what do you think are some pros and cons of using the directing style of communication, just in general?
I believe that a con might be in a consumer's eyes, it might set us up as like the expert. And I just never think that's a good place to be, especially if we want to go back to trauma survivors. Oftentimes their triggers, childhood trauma survivors, their triggers aren't loud noises or crashes or whatever. It's relational. Mm-hmm. and it's authority figures. So we just have to be really careful with creating a mutually, like, I don't know the word I want, a mutual relational with our consumers. So to beware of not coming across as the directing expert, I am here for you and I am going to do for you and listen to me.
Right. So it can be a little bit bullish sometimes, especially when working with people with trauma. And it can sometimes create a bit of like a hierarchy or this differential in power that doesn't really lend itself to a collaborative partnership with clients that we're seeking. It can also perhaps foster some reliance upon us as the expert rather than clients feeling empowered or clients practicing autonomy. But I think what the flip side of it in other situations could be that it maybe because it is more direct. I know that sometimes with caseloads, there are a lot of numbers, there are a lot of clients to serve. So I think that in some situations, directing might be a bit more time efficient when we don't necessarily have the luxury of it in all situations. What about pros and cons of following? Anything that comes to mind?
I think if someone is working with someone who may have experienced trauma or whatever it might be in our consumer's experience, I think trying to follow that, to be sensitive to them, you have to be very careful that you don't get caught up in the emotion that they might be experiencing. So we have to be real clear about boundaries and be very clear about what we can and cannot do. Try to be sensitive to them, but not to get caught up in their emotional drama, because sometimes that's difficult. And I think if we went the following way, then they might see us as being sympathetic rather than empathetic. And so I think we have to be very, very clear about how we can, that we are concerned about them and we care about them and we want to be there for them, but they have to be engaged in their own process.
Yes, great point. Thanks, Mary. So we certainly have to be much more vigilant if we're working with following in some of the boundaries that we respect, especially when we're working with clients who experience trauma. I'm also thinking that another pro is that we probably can get more buy-in from clients if they're in the driver's seat. So in some situations that might be another good perk of following. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, does someone want to read this quote for us?
What is motivational interviewing? MI is a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. It is designed to strengthen personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion.
Awesome. Thanks for reading, Ruby. So this is where MI is really living in the guiding part of the communication continuum. So we may still find ourselves fluctuating to one or another, but really where our home is in the guiding part. So motivational interviewing is not a counseling theory, but it can be used in combination with theory. So it doesn't have, for example, like CBT tells us, that someone has a cognition, which may lead to a behavior, right? And we know that cognition and emotions are tied together, and that can sculpt somebody's behavior. So we maybe change how people think about things, right? Motivational interviewing doesn't explain to us all of these nuances of people's psychology and their behavior, but it does give us some insight when it comes to how to tap into people's motivation, hence the term motivational interviewing, right? So it can be used really well in combination with other theories if there's a particular theory that really resonates with you. Okay, so why would I want to use motivational interviewing and serving clients with substance use disorders? And I have a quote here that I just thought was such a good one. I'll read it for us. People with substance use problems and disorders often have mixed feelings and thoughts about their smoking, drug, and alcohol use. While they may perceive some negative consequences of smoking, drinking, or using drugs, they also enjoy positive experiences such as intoxication, disinhibition, socialization, and pleasure. They often remain in a conflicted or ambivalent state about changing unless the perception of these costs and benefits shifts. Understanding and resolving this ambivalence is a central goal of motivational interviewing and is accomplished through elicitation rather than persuasion. So we're not trying to just like convince or maybe badger somebody into making a change. We're helping them figure out, well, what is this ambivalence about, and really understanding this ambivalence. And what is that ambivalence rooted in? So for people with substance use disorders, maybe it's like, hey, I really like getting high. It feels great. I understand that I have challenged a lot of my personal relationships, and I now have found myself unemployed as a consequence of it, but I still really like it, right? Or maybe my loved one gave me an ultimatum, or I have CPS involvement. So a lot of situations which may seem clear cut to others aren't necessarily so. So we know that some clients can understand that their substance use really impacts their work history, but maybe they are not ready to change, or maybe they are, or maybe you may think like, oh, well, my substance use isn't a big deal. I don't really need to change. Or some people may be like, oh, well, there's actually there's no problem at all. So we know that clients can respond or share with you their thoughts on their substance use in all sorts of different ways. So it's important to understand ambivalence, forwards, backwards, and sideways, because I think when we don't understand ambivalence, man, can we feel really frustrated as providers. So being ambivalent is such a normal part of the human experience. It's when we see reasons both to change and to not change, right? Like I understand that that when I use crack, that I make decisions that are really poor for myself. But I really like using crack, or I enjoy some of the people with whom using crack has given me like a lot of fun social experiences, right? It's not necessarily just clear cut. And for me, it could be something like, I'm such a chocolate fan. Like, I understand that I probably need to eat less chocolate, especially now that I'm so sedentary with COVID. But I really like eating chocolate, even though I know it's not good for me. And it helps, and it's contributed to my weight gain, right? So really ambivalence is universal across people and across circumstance. People want to change, but don't want to change at the same time. Those two feelings aren't mutually exclusive. And it's really, really important that we understand that as providers. So what are some topics about which clients often exhibit ambivalence? What do you see in your clinical practice?
I think I'm gonna share. Normally I don't share, but I'm gonna share something on a personal level for me. One, because I'm not, my position here is not, I'm not a counselor. But on a personal level, I do have somebody who is very near and dear to me, who is an alcoholic and has addictions. And one of the things that I experience with this person quite often is, 1 second, I need help, I want to go to rehab. And then it's like 2 seconds later, not even 2 seconds, it's like, I like it and I want to do it. But then, can you help me? So the mixed signals, the mixed messages, it's, I want to do this because I like how it makes me feel, or I like how it makes me not feel, but I want help.
Yeah, and those conflicting statements are an excellent example of just how confusing ambivalence is for an individual experiencing it, as well as the people around them. If it's loved ones, or if it's someone trying to work with them in a professional capacity, right? So one day a client can be like, hey, I really am, I want to get clean and sober. Or maybe tomorrow it's like, hey, I'm not ready. Or maybe it's hey, I really hate my roommate and I want to find a new place to live. Oh, I love my roommate. We're doing great. I'm good. I hate this job, or I'm not ready to work, or I really want help finding a job. right? So some of this where it seems like people might be back and forth or where they might be indecisive. Perhaps a better word to describe what they're going through is ambivalence, right? People can concurrently want to change and not want to change at the same time. So when people are ambivalent, you're going to probably hear two different types of talk mixed together. And so that's change talk and sustained talk. So change talk is when someone's making comments that favor change. Oh, well, I really want to do this, or I really want to do that, or, I need to change. I need to do something differently. The opposite of change talk is sustained talk. That's someone's arguments for not changing. Instead, they want us to sustain the status quo. So this could maybe be a but or a yes, but, right? ... And whatever follows. But it's really hard, or I kind of like having drinks, right? So what's our natural reaction when we hear change talk from the people that we serve? And so let's say someone's like, oh, I've really been going back and forth about quitting drinking because of I keep fighting with my spouse, and, our roommates don't like us, and I've been getting in trouble at work for showing up late. So I think I'm going to quit drinking. So if a client walks into your office and says this, what's most people's natural reaction?
Hope.
Sure. What are some words that you might say in response, Ruby?
I would try to focus on positive words. That's great. That's awesome. Of course, then I'll probably say, how can I help you? Can I do it for you? I'm bad that way. But I would try to keep the conversation positive.
Sure. And I think that most people would. We like to take up the good side of the argument, right? And in our professional perspective, that's going to be to make this positive change that we've probably secretly been cheering for all along. And maybe explain like why we agree that this change is good and why it should happen. And then maybe also telling them, well, you could do this, that, and that. And what do you want me to do? Well, I can do X, Y, and Z for you. So perhaps we also find ourselves changing into a bit of a directing style, right? So chances are that the client has already heard the good side of the argument, or knows all of the benefits, right? If I stop drinking, it's going to have these benefits for my health. It's going to be easier to keep my job. It's going to reduce the conflict I'm having with my loved ones, right? So what often happens next, and so let's say this is like a client is still experiencing ambivalence, and they've first told us like, hey, I'm thinking about quitting. So we often get okay, well, yes, I'm going to do that. But in that, but maybe other things like, but I know it's going to be really hard. I don't think I can do it. But my spouse is still drinking, so it's going to be really hard. So is it even worth trying? Right. So there may be some of this other sustained talk that we hear. Because we often hear change talk and sustained talk together, even in the same sentence sometimes. So if we argue for one side of the argument, if we lean into one side of the argument, it's not uncommon for clients to lean in the other side. So let's say if Ruby, for example, if you were to be like, hey, awesome, I'm so excited. And let's say if the next time we see a client, they feel a little bit more ambivalent, maybe don't feel as committed to change, right? So the more we're like, hey, well, you said X, Y, and Z. You said that if you were going to quit drinking, that it was going to help your mental health and your physical health. And what happened, right? So if we come at the client with that, chances are they're going to lean to the other argument. Well, even if I stop drinking, I still have diabetes. I'm still gonna be around alcohol, right? And so I think that often when we lean into one side of the argument, and clients will lean into the other, and then clients are mistakenly labeled as being resistant or being in denial about the reality of the circumstances at hand. So this is a totally normal human process when it comes to ambivalence. Ambivalence is really complicated and sticky. Okay, so I want to try this thought experiment just to kind of demonstrate how people are inclined to respond when someone leans into one argument or another. Okay, so I'll put, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll put us into some breakout rooms here. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. So one person out of the pair I'm going to put you in, think about something you've been thinking about changing, or should change, or maybe want to change, but you haven't changed. So in other words, think of a change about which you find yourself to be personally ambivalent. It doesn't have to be anything super crazy, personal, deep. Just think about something. Now I want the other person, your partner, to tell you how much you need to make this change, emphasize the importance of changing, and tell you how to do it, how you should go about doing this, and just to get on with the change. Okay, so that's the first iteration of it. And then I want you to have the conversation a second time. But this time, your partner doesn't give you any advice and just asks open-ended questions like, well, why do you want to make this change? What are the top 3 reasons of why you think you should make this change? How important is this change to you? And what do you think you'll do? So let's try that. So I'm going to go ahead and pause my share and put people into breakout rooms. Okay, and let's give us, this shouldn't take too long. We'll say about 5 minutes. I'm trying to join. Toby, are you able to get into your room? Sounds like our colleagues are having a fun time. Welcome back, everyone. I'd love to hear about what that experience of practice was like for you.
I think one of the I was the I was the person who wants the change, but I was arguing over wanting the change. I was being ambivalent. I want the change, but I need to not have the change in my life. I need what I'm doing, but I don't want what I'm doing. and that's difficult for me. It's difficult. And it's about smoking. I smoke. I don't want to smoke, but I need to smoke for reasons that I need to have my cigarette. And so the teeter-totter I'm on it's hard because I know for my health I need to quit smoking. I want to be around to see my grandkids even tell me, Grandma, we want you to be around are you going to be alive when I get married? From my 6-year-old granddaughter. And it's like, I want to be, but I need that cigarette right now because life is coming at me 100 different directions. So I know why, but I also know why not.
And Ruby, who was your partner?
Mary.
So what was it like when Mary tried one approach versus the other? What difference could you feel?
Both approaches actually. I went into my excuse mode.
Okay.
That was my go-to, but I need it. I'm not there yet where I'm not there yet where I'm not at that step I need to take to not smoke.
Right. You're still really, you found yourself grounded in this ambivalence where you can't let go of one side or the other. Both of them, why to quit and why to not quit, are both still very much in your grasp.
And I think one of the things that if I truly am honest with myself, it's the excuse that I use to smoke. I have stressors in my life. I think what I need to learn to let go of is the stress, but I don't want to let go of the stress, if that makes sense.
Sure. So I practiced with Amber, and Amber was the one that was considering changing something. And so with one approach versus the other, first felt like high pressure sales, right? I was just so excited that Amber wanted to try something new that was going to be positive that I kind of jumped all over it and felt really like, whoa, to Amber. But then the other approach was a little bit more like, well, hey, let's explore this. Let's talk about it. Amber, do you want to share how you felt one experience was versus the other?
Yeah, the first experience was like just kind of like felt like pressure, like gave me a little anxiety, and made me feel like I, all of a sudden had to do it and not like it was my choice. And then the second experience was just like you being curious and like getting me to talk about it a little more, and which felt nice, and like it actually like reaffirmed my decision. So it was much, much better.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Amber. So as we think about ambivalence, also think about change talk and sustain talk, right? We're going to hear both of those and often in tandem. But those three concepts are really important for us to have a fundamental understanding of what clients are maybe going back and forth about in their mind. So let's make sure that we commit those three concepts: ambivalence, change talk, and sustain talk to memory, because we're going to rely on that a lot more, especially as we talk about clients being quote unquote resistant. Okay, I'm going to share screen and move forward in our slides. Okay, oh, hold on, all of you disappeared. Let me bring you back. Okay. Okay, so here's another good quote from Miller and Rolnick about the spirit of MI. MI is not a way of tricking people into changing. It's a way of activating their own motivation and resources for change. So I'm not trying to be manipulative here to trick someone like, aha, I got you to say that you're going to change, right? I'm really trying to get people just to figure out what is going on inside them, to explore these reasons for changing and for sustaining. So a really good way of thinking about the spirit of MI, if you read any articles or books on MI, I really recommend, let's see, this one that's in the picture, Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change. It's just a really great resource for your practice, regardless of what setting you are and what types of clients you're serving. But the way that Miller and Rolnick describe the spirit of MI is like, sometimes we learn how to do MI, or so maybe that's like we learn the words of it. But if we don't learn the spirit of MI, then we're not learning the music. So we want to make sure that we're like, if we're learning a song, we learn the words and the music, right? We learn how to do MI as well as the spirit behind it. So the spirit of MI is really the mindset, but also the heart set, really trying to understand the ambivalence of clients and rolling with it, working with it. So the spirit of MI has 4 key components. The first being partnership. And so that's when we know that clients are experts on themselves, right? We may have some knowledge and expertise, but clients are subject matter experts on being them. We're not doing services to someone, but for and with clients. We should do less than half of the talking. We should also strive to create a positive interpersonal environment that's conducive to change, but not coercive. So think of all the environments in which clients with substance use disorders, especially all of the coercive environments, the clients have already found themselves, and let's aspire to not be another one. So partnership is really this collaborative process between ourselves and a client. Acceptance. That's acceptance of what the client brings. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to condone all of the client's decisions or behaviors, but really just accept the client as they are right now, here and now. Does this sound similar to any counseling theories? Carl Rogers, maybe, right? So this really borrows from Carl Rogers' person-centered counting, unconditional positive regard. And I know that especially when we're working with people with substance use disorders, especially in early recovery, relapse is pretty common. Sometimes acceptance can be really challenging for us to practice. But nonetheless, it's very, very important. It's one of the 4 key components of the spirit of MI. The next is compassion. That's deliberate commitment to pursue the welfare and best interests of clients. We're probably naturally compassionate people, being that we find ourselves in a helping profession. And let's see, next is evocation. So often as service providers, we can come from a model of, well, I have what you need and I'm going to give it to you, right? But this stance is a deficit model that's focused on evaluating clients to figure out what's lacking so that I or the agency can give it to the client. An evocation stance says, well, you client have what you need and together we can find it. So this stance is a strengths model, and it really is focused on tapping into the client's strengths and resources to unleash whatever it is that they need so that they can be the solution. Okay. And this is the 4 processes of MI. Okay, so MI essentially has like 4 steps, if you will, that are in sequence. These are different phases of MI that we encounter in working with clients. Some of them overlap with one another. So as you enter the next phase or process, you're going to take the others with you. But if you're in one process and because they flow in order, if you don't make it through one process, like if I don't make it through engaging, I'm unlikely to make it to focusing, evoking, or planning, for example. So what are these for? So engaging is just acknowledgement that every relationship begins with a period of engagement where we're building rapport with clients. We don't really know too much about them aside from maybe what we read in their file. They might not know too much about us. We know that first impressions are super powerful, and that's a two-way street. And we know that forming a professional alliance, a therapeutic alliance, whatever type of alliance based on the services that we're providing, but that type of professional relationship can very much dictate the quality of the work we do with clients, as well as how clients perceive their experience, their satisfaction with whatever service that we've provided to them. It would be great if we could spend a ton of time in this process and engaging, but I know that sometimes we don't always have the luxury of time, but it's really, really, really important because it, as you can see in this picture, engaging is the foundation of all 4 processes of MI. It's really hard to get further along in working with a client and examining their ambivalence if you don't have a strong engagement with them. Next is focusing. So that's like, hey, what are we going to do? What's our agenda? What did the client come to see us for? So maybe it's they want recovery services, or they need help staying in their home and living independently. Maybe we're providing case management, whatever it is. So focusing is the process by which we develop and maintain a specific direction in the conversation about change. So maybe we can ask ourselves, what changes does the client hope will arise from our time working together? And evoking is in eliciting the client's motivations for change, which is really at the heart of MI. So this is where we harness the client's own ideas, their own feelings, their motivation for how they might change. It's when the client can voice their own arguments for change. People talk themselves into changing. Sure, maybe sometimes they can listen to other people and that helps them talk themselves into changing, but you'd be hard pressed to try to talk someone into changing. However, if a client arrives to your office, already have talked themselves into changing, then you will quickly find yourself in the 4th process, planning. So planning is when people's motivation reaches a threshold of readiness. And think of it as like a fulcrum where the balance has tipped and they begin thinking and talking about when and how they might make the change, and less about whether or not they want to change and why. So planning is more than just, I'm going to do A, B, and C. It's more of like, well, let's talk about your commitment to change. Why do you want to make this change? How important is this change to you? What is your motivation to make this change happen? Do you feel that you're ready to make this change, right? It's not just, we're going to come up with an action plan, it's A, B, and C, but really, what are some thoughts and feelings that are behind this change? And then coming up with a specific plan of action. And also, planning isn't one and done. As I'm sure all of you have experienced, plans don't always go how we think them out, right? That often we have to kind of revisit and evaluate. Well, how did things go? Did it go according to plan? What didn't work out? What can we do differently the next time? So we may need to revisit it from time to time. So as we're going through these 4 processes of MI, let's see, just for the sake of time here. Okay, so as we're in each process, there are some ways that we may want to take a step back and ask ourselves as providers, how are things going in each of these processes when we're working with clients? So let's say you just met a client, maybe you're doing intake with them and you're working on engaging, right? So you're coming from a place where you're accepting the client as they are, how they are, with unconditional positive regard. Perhaps you can ask yourself, does this feel like a collaborative partnership, right? Is there a balance between the client and the agency, or me speaking and the client speaking? So that would be a good question to ask yourself when you're in the engaging process. What about focusing? So let's say if you're kind of trying to come up with some type of a treatment plan or an action plan for your work with the client, what's a way that you can take a step back and ask yourself questions about how this is going with clients? A good question you can ask yourself, does this feel more like dancing or wrestling, right? Does it feel like you two are waltzing together? Like you have some mutuality to your work together? Or does it feel like you're kind of having to wrestle a client to come up with some goals that are really meaningful to you and to them, right? If we feel like we're wrestling with clients, then we may need to take a step back and evaluate. And evoking. So evoking is when people are talking themselves into changing. So a question we can ask ourselves is, well, what change talk am I hearing? Really trying to come back from a meta perspective when we look at change talk and sustain talk, but what does this change talk look like? And then lastly, in planning, asking ourselves, am I offering needed information or advice with permission? Right? Am I giving information because somebody asked for it? Or am I just kind of giving out all this information that nobody asked for? Okay. So I'm going to stop my share for just a minute. Okay, so we covered, I can't believe it's been nearly an hour already. So we covered some key concepts of MI. Let's just check in about what are some key points that stuck with your brain about what we learned today. And feel free to use the chat or just call it on out.
I actually liked what you just said, and it just made me think not just, maybe not just using it here at work, but in other areas of my life is, am I giving information with permission?
Mhm.
I really like that. Because
Great.
I tend to fix people and just do this and do that, and I'm a very directing kind of person, but I really like this, and I think that I am going to I like that, and ask myself each time, am I giving this with permission? I really like that.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. We're so committed to being helpers that sometimes we just can't help ourselves from helping. Jennifer.
It made me think about the counseling process that I use every day and how sometimes I go to that planning stage too fast. And maybe I would have better outcomes if I do more in the motivation stage and allow them to become more motivated towards the goal if that's what they want. Kind of explore that more so they feel more invested. And then when we do go to that planning, they feel more invested and maybe would have better outcomes.
Definitely slowing down a little bit gets us to a point where we have more buy-in from clients because we are following them into that process. We're not trying to drag them kicking and screaming to it. So in the last 2 minutes that we have, I have this one poem that relates to what we talked about today. And it was just such a beautiful poem. And so it's when Miller, one of the, you guys went away again, let me bring you back. One of the authors or one of the figureheads of motivational interviewing, when he was working with Indigenous communities, and the community members shared how helpful it would be to have a lot of the spirit of MI embodied in poem form. So they co-authored this poem together, and I'll read it aloud. And so we can close with this today. Guide me to be a patient companion, to listen with a heart as open as the sky. Grant me a vision to see through her eyes and eager ears to hear her story. Create a safe and open mesa on which we may walk together. Make me a clear pool in which she may reflect. Guide me to find in her your beauty and wisdom, knowing your desire for her to be in harmony, healthy, loving, and strong. Let me honor and respect her choosing of her own path and bless her to walk it freely. May I know once again that although she and I are different, yet there is a peaceful place where we are one. So tomorrow, I really look forward to sharing about some tips and traps when working with specific interventions of motivational interviewing. And we will also talk about using OARS, which is a good mnemonic device, which details the specific interventions of using motivational interviewing. And we'll get some good practice in breakout rooms tomorrow. I'll hang out if you have any questions or comments, but I also wanted just to be respectful of your time. Julie.
Yeah, I just scrolled down through the PowerPoint. That last slide isn't on there, and that's the one I was going to print out. Could you send that to me or to all of us? I love that poem. It's just beautiful in the imagery and, like, again, the spirit of what you're inviting us to do. So
Sure, I'm going to drop it in the chat right now, and I can also email it out if that works.
Yeah, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I can print from the chat.
Let's see. Oh, it's a PNG. It won't let me. I'll work on getting that for tomorrow. I'm glad you liked it, Julie.
Yeah, thank you.
Will send it to me or to Robin.
Okay.
We will send it out to everybody. We will make sure that you get it, Julie.
Great. Thank you. Okay, well, I look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you
Very
so
good
much,
job.
Vanessa.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.